Welcome to LionHeart Talks, a series of podcasts from LionHeart.
Hello and welcome to our third series of LionHeart Talks. I'm Melissa Gough Rundle and I'm Head of Development at LionHeart, and today we have a really big topic that we are discussing, and that is around our youth counselling service. And I'm very lucky today to have with me Colette and Carmel from Open Door, and I'm going to hand over to the pair of them now to introduce themselves. Over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Carmel, and I'm the CEO at Open Door Counselling. I've got quite a history at Open Door. I've been there now for around 35 years, and it was actually the beginning of my journey into therapy. I'm going to Open Door to train as a volunteer counsellor. So that really was a springboard for my developing how I wanted to work with people, how I wanted to develop myself. And then I went further into 5 years as a volunteer at Open Door, seeing clients with clinical supervision provided. And then I did another couple of years clinical supervision, again as a volunteer. And then was fortunate enough to actually find a post in Open Door, a paid post, which I guess in those days was fairly unusual. So I felt incredibly fortunate about that. My first role there was training and development officer. And then I went on to do some academic training to become qualified as a counsellor, a person-centred counsellor. And then I trained as a clinical supervisor. So both of those qualifications then were sort of the legit part of the work, if you like, because at that point, volunteering wasn't kind of seen as important then, although that did grow. There was sort of lots of work I had to do within that service, and one of the things that was crucially important was developing the work that we did, and I was instrumental at that point in getting counselling into schools in Birmingham, which was really quite hard work, but very rewarding to see our first counsellor go into a school in Birmingham. And then instrumental in getting Open Door accredited as a BACP accredited service. So yeah, quite a long history, and I could go on talking for ages about it. My passion is Open Door, and my passion obviously is person-centered therapy. So that's a little bit about me.
So I'm Colette. A little bit about me. I've worked with children, young people, and adults probably for about 25 years now in various capacities. Firstly, in what was the youth service, and then in a local authority as a social worker, in a frontline child protection team, and then an urgent care team trying to prevent family breakdown. And then in my current role as a counsellor and manager at Open Door. For me, my passion and drive is about creating a space in which our clients can really start to understand themselves better by exploring what's really difficult in their lives. And once that begins, we can start to work towards change. And I think for me, that ultimately is the magic of counselling and therapy.
That's lovely. Thank you both and welcome. You've been working with LionHeart now for quite some time. This is one of the amazing support offerings that we provide to chartered surveyors and their families, and we know the benefit that this is already providing to some of those members that get in contact, and how we're helping them with their dependents and their family support as well. And this is why I am really pleased to be able to highlight this service today, because we all recognise the strain that the NHS is under when it comes to supporting youngsters with their mental health. The waiting lists seem to just be getting longer. So for us to be able to provide this to members and their families is, for us, an absolute joy to be able to provide this, because we know how important it is for children to get plugged into that system as soon as possible. This really isn't somewhere where we need to be waiting around, and so we are just, it's amazing that we can provide this service through you. I touched a bit there on, it's not just about the individual, it is about the family, and and looking at family centre support. So, question for both of you really: why is it important to support the whole family and not just the child during this counselling journey?
Yeah, I think we know that when someone in a family is struggling or having a difficult time, that person isn't in isolation. So it impacts on the whole family. So if a child is struggling, it impacts on parents' ability to engage in their work, maybe their own mental health. And so we try to work as holistically as possible, supporting the whole family whilst also keeping the client at the very centre of what we do. Because we recognise that, we're with that client for 1 hour a week. Their family or parents, caregivers are with them for the rest of the time. So they are gonna be the ones that are gonna be really instrumental in kind of propping up the work that's done in therapy and creating sustainable change and looking at what needs to be different within that family. So we can't just kind of ignore family members, um, because they play such a key part in the whole process.
Is there a specific role that parents or siblings can play?
When a child is going through that whole therapeutic process?
It's about them supporting their child to access counselling, which I'm sure we'll get to later on, but about not over pushing them, what happened in the session, what did you talk about, what was said, but encouraging them, creating an environment where it's okay to have therapy, where it doesn't feel like anything to be embarrassed about or ashamed about. And also, children, well, any client, children, young people or adults, they may change during the process. They may their behaviour may change, their coping strategies may change, and it's about parents recognising that, siblings recognising that maybe their sister or brother is slightly different now, and kind of embracing that and supporting it and validating it, I guess.
That's good. That's good to hear. I think it would be a good point now to talk about how we would perhaps introduce counselling or the need for counselling to a child. It's probably something that the
Mm.
parents would think of first, and it's like it's taking that first step. So, if a parent thinks their child could probably benefit from some counselling, what do you think is the best way to start that conversation within perhaps the family, or even when reaching out to Lionheart?
I think it's really important that we sort of welcome the parents in a warm and compassionate way as part of that whole process. As Colette's just run over some of that. It's also, really good to sort of explain who we are, what our involvement with the service is, a little bit about how we will work with their young person. And also explaining confidentiality to the parent. Obviously there's nothing as absolute confidentiality, so we have to explain the boundaries of that in a sensitive and caring way, and talk about safeguarding how we may well need to sort of break the young person's confidentiality to speak with the parents. Um, and just how important that whole engagement is at that first stage. And we want to do that without kind of, imposing or making the parent or carers feel that, there's a restriction or they're not being included. So it's getting that balance right, really.
And do you think there's any practical steps that a parent can take to prepare that child for their first
Yeah.
session, or kind of framing it in that respect? What would you
Yeah.
suggest?
It's really useful for the parent to talk with the young person because obviously the young person needs to want to engage in that process. So I think preparing them, making sure they've got a room that they've got the equipment they need, they've got a safe room within their home if it's online, that they won't be interrupted, that space is for the young person themselves, and it's not going to be intrusive by anyone. Just to be mindful when the session ends that the child may feel a bit fearful or anxious or just want to be quiet for a while. So to allow that, and to encourage the parents to understand that we're really trying to empower that child really to build up their own confidence, their self-esteem, and their resources, so that as life goes on, they can cope with things as they come up. So those practical steps of creating the right environments, giving them a room they can work in, not interrupting them, giving them the space afterwards to just maybe think about or let go of the session they've just had.
That's really interesting because more often than not, this might be the first experience a family have, leave alone the child, of going into counselling or being in this situation. So it can seem quite strange and probably a bit alien to them. So I suppose once they've engaged, they've taken those initial steps, they've reached out to Lionheart, we've had the conversation and you guys are involved in their care. What strategies do you recommend for children to just help them open up? I mean, what does that initial process look like?
Yeah, I think we tend to find they either arrive at a session having not really an idea of what it's going to look like, what's going to be expected of them, what they can and can't say, whether they're going to be questioned, and that can then sometimes leave them a bit withdrawn, not very communicative. And then on the other side of it, we sometimes arrive at a session and a client just goes boom and opens up and starts talking. And it's the first time, the first experience they've had of just being able to kind of completely offload. So I guess with the clients that are a bit more anxious or a bit more withdrawn or less engaged initially, we take it really slowly, take it at their pace. We're clear about what counselling is, what it looks like, that it's their space, that we're not going to tell them what to do. We're not teachers, we're not the experts. They are the experts. And sometimes it's about just establishing that relationship, the rapport. So asking them what their hobbies are, what they like doing, just to create the environment again, which is so important, in which they can start to think, okay, I might be able to start talking to this person about what's worrying me. So that generally is what we'll do. We'll take it at their pace, lots of encouragement, lots of validation, lots of listening, and reassuring that this is for them and for their benefit. And also being honest that if they don't want to be there, it's their choice. We're not going to force them. We're not going to tell them they've got to come. They need to be willing to engage. And sometimes that can be really helpful, taking that pressure off that, okay, I don't have to be here if I don't want to, but I'll give it a try.
And that's really nice to know that it's very much the service that you provide is very much tailored to that individual and
Mm,
that things are taken at their pace.
mm,
And this is all about them being at the centre of what it is that you're trying to do. And I think that would be quite reassuring to parents, knowing that if a child is going into this process, that they are being supported
mhm,
throughout that as well. And it is very much, as you say, the support is being tailored to that individual child, which and I imagine everybody's different. They don't necessarily follow a pattern, and you don't know where
mhm,
perhaps the sessions are going to lead you. And it's about having that adaptability to be able to support that
mhm.
individual, which is
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
I've
Yeah.
also heard as well, and I was so delighted when I heard this, that Open Door provide almost a wraparound service as well. It's not just about that individual and helping them, that there are so many other areas that you
mm,
consider when you're looking at the therapy for that child.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of comes back to that idea of, ethically and morally, we couldn't just sit with that young person for an hour a week and then just sort of wave them off if there was other stuff we could support and help with. So that might look like many different things, engaging with schools, pastoral teams, engaging with a family GP, psychiatrist if appropriate, making onward referrals to more specialist services. Alongside that talking to parents and working with them to support them to better understand their child. So that is something we do almost probably exclusively with all our clients. We very rarely do we wave them off at the end of the session, and there's nothing else between that and the next session. So that is absolutely fundamental to our kind of values as a service, that's what we need to do for our clients.
Yeah.
And it works from what I can understand. The service is, you do take that time to look at the child in the round and what other areas there are that need to be brought into the process, which is what is so unique about your service, and I think and sets it apart, because it, as you say, it's not done in isolation, because you recognise that it's not just a 3-step process or whatever. It is about you're moving at the child's pace. You're recognising all of the influences in their kind of circle, their family circle, their what other professionals might be involved, and also school. And this is why it is such a holistic approach, and it is such a fantastic service that you provide. We're looking very much at the positives. I mean, quite obviously, I'm sure there are challenges. There is always going to be challenges in this situation when working with children and young adults. And firstly, let's look at what perhaps could be some of the challenges that are faced by the family, and what perhaps the parents do that might common mistakes that parents might have when a child's going through the counselling process, and how can they help avoid them or support the child the best they can.
Okay. I think part of what Colette has said is sort of impactful on this question as well, in terms of the support that we give the parents. I think is very helpful for them then to support their children in a way that's appropriate and supports the counselling generally. So it's kind of a follow on the idea that we stay in touch with parents, that we allow them to know that they can come back to us if they have any questions or queries or concerns. We encourage the parents sort of to give the young person this space when they're having the counselling, to sort of not ask too many questions of what's going on, to allow them to build up that trust with their counsellor. Parents are busy people, as we all know, and if they can just make a little bit of space, we encourage them perhaps each day or a couple of days a week to say, "Look, I'm here. I can listen now. I'm not doing the dinner. I'm not rushing to go out. I'm not working. Do you want to talk? Not we must talk. Do you want to talk? Is there anything you want to sit with me for 15 minutes and go through?" Don't ask too many questions. Allow their child to do the talking, and more listening than talking for the parent is what we say. I think some of the perhaps common mistakes could be around asking too many questions of their child when they're having the counselling. And I think it's meant with the best of intentions, but perhaps just asking too many questions of them, perhaps not allowing the time to build up that trust. But again, I think it goes back to how do we treat that parent in the beginning and throughout that process that enables them to understand in a better way, with greater clarity, how the child is engaging with the process, how the parent can help outside of the counselling sessions. So again, as that holistic approach, nothing's in isolation for us at Open Door.
I think I'd just add to that. I sometimes, when I'm talking to parents, hear them describe or talk about feelings of guilt or blame, and we really try and help and they're kind of stuck with that, and that can kind of almost create a bit of a paralysis. And so it's about helping them to move away from guilt and blame, and looking at okay, that's been done now, that's happened. It might be that we need to signpost the parent for counselling back to you guys at LionHeart if they need their own therapy. But also helping them, okay, let's take responsibility. That's done now. What needs to be different? What needs to change? Blame and guilt won't be helpful. So how can things be different for you all as a family, and what part do you all play in that picture? So that's conversations I have quite regularly, I would say.
And that comes back to that point you were making about this being a holistic approach, because I think we all appreciate that young people coming into the counselling process, there are going to be a lots of guilt feelings And that affects not just the child but also the family as well. Why is the
Yeah.
child going to this person? Why are they so sad? What have I done wrong? Why have I
Yeah.
ended up in this position? So
Mm.
for Open Door to be able to almost like wrap their arms around the family and say,
Yeah.
okay, it's okay to
Mhm.
feel this way, and we're
Yeah.
here to help you navigate those feelings and find your way out of the maze and
Yeah.
start helping you to unpick. I think that must feel fantastic to a family that really have going through that process. And I know from my own situation, I think both of you appreciate that I had a child that was going through school avoidant, and wasn't able to access the system. The guilt that was placed on us as parents for that child not being at school was horrendous. So being able to almost, I wish that I had Open Door available to me at that time, because it would have felt amazing for someone to come to me and go, "It's okay. It's
Yeah.
normal that you feel this way, and it's not your fault," would have been
Yeah.
amazing. And I know certainly, having spoken to parents that are in a similar situation who are surveyors, being able to have that conversation and say, "It is okay," you feel has been brilliant, and know that there is almost not necessarily a solution, but there's a step in the journey that is very positive, because there's so much negativity around children's mental health, especially if
Yeah.
there's a challenge with school, if you're almost fighting with the authority or feel like you're fighting with the challenge with the relationship with school or with the authorities, the local authorities, it can become a real burden, because you want to do the right thing to protect your child, but you're being told that this isn't right. That
Yeah.
not that you're somehow maybe a bad parent. I know that's
Mhm.
but you do feel that way. I'm personal experience. You feel like a bad parent and you don't know what to do or who to listen to.
Yeah, of
And
course.
sometimes I wish there was a little bit of a manual or there was a guide or something, a how-to guide, but there's nothing out there
Yeah,
sometimes.
absolutely.
Open Door would have been a real light at the end of the tunnel for me. I know that. So it's absolutely delightful to know that we can just it's there to access for surveyors and their families. It's brilliant. And if we can highlight what you do, then more the better, because I think, this is just unbelievable what you provide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful. As I say, I think what you do is so amazing.
Yeah. I was just going to say it's also incredibly rewarding for us as a service to be able to kind of support parents in that way, given what you've just said as well, that we can point them in various directions for additional support and help, and that is really good for us as a service. And to hear a parent come back and say, "I'm so glad you offered us this because it's made such a difference to our lives," and that's why we do what we do and are passionate about what we do.
Indeed. What are the common areas of support that you're being required to give at the moment?
Sometimes you sit with a client and you expect from a referral for a particular issue to be what they want to talk about, and it becomes very apparent that that isn't their main concern or isn't their priority at that point. But in terms of themes, I guess we hear lots about difficulties at school, both academically and around peers, establishing and maintaining positive friendships. Self-esteem is absolutely massive. Young people just have, some young people, I'm not making assumptions, but young people have such low self-esteem, look, such low self-worth, don't like who they are, what they are, how they look. Lots of anxieties. Again, that can be around school, around home, if there's parental conflict. Some young people are worried about kind of stuff about parents' jobs. They hear lots on the news and in the press about the cost of living crisis and worried that that might impact on their life. And general levels of stress. I'm always not surprised, but saddened to hear young people saying how stressful their life is and how difficult, daily life can sometimes be for them. So lots of stress and anxiety. I'd say those are the most common themes, but there's probably 101 other ones.
And we hear a lot in the news and in the press, you mentioned that, and it's true, don't we? We do hear a lot about children, there seems to be a rise in terms of neurodiversity. We're talking here about maybe autism and ADHD. I mean, when a child has received a diagnosis or a parent suspects, I imagine that there are some challenges around that as well in terms of mental health and how they navigate those conditions, especially with school. And I imagine that comes up quite a bit for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, that would be where we would look at kind of advocating for that child or young person. So what needs to be done for things to be a little bit easier for you, or what are the barriers to accessing some of those things? So we will try again putting them right at the center of it. You're the expert, you know what's going to make life better or easier for you, you know what might help. So let's talk about that in a positive way, and then let's look at how we can share that information with the people that need to know. So again, that's something we will do quite regularly. And we also hear a lot about, young people that have fairly recently had a diagnosis, that, okay, finally I can understand myself a bit more. Finally, my patterns of behavior make sense to me a little bit more. And then that can be really helpful and really empowering for them.
Yeah.
And I'm again talking back about this from a personal perspective as well. And it was great to hear you say that, is that it's what can you put in place to help that individual, what will help that individual in whether it's in their school environment or home environment. I can remember having conversations with school saying, well, if you approach it like this, then you'll get the best
Mhm.
out of my
Yeah.
child.
Mm.
And I think sometimes having the confidence to be able to do that, because it's not easy going to school and saying,
Mhm.
if you just tried it this way, or if you approached it in this way, rather than shouting or rather
Mhm.
giving punishments out, if you could approach it this way. And to be fair, when some staff at school did adopt that, they found a completely different child at school. And it
Yeah.
is so rewarding to be able to have those conversations and have the confidence to be able to say, this worked. And could we talk about it more in terms of helping that individual? But it is having that confidence. And it's great
Yeah.
to know that as part of the open door process, you are able to help parents, you are able to maybe get
Mhm.
school involved as well, so that there's a
Yeah.
almost like a consistent approach across all
Mhm.
settings.
Mhm.
That child actually feels that they're the centre of it, and you're getting the best out of the child.
Mhm.
About the
Yeah.
child
Yeah.
obviously to fit into the certain system. It's about actually what little tweaks, and we're not talking necessarily about major tweaks. What
Mhm.
things can we do every day to make that child's life a little bit easier, and
Yeah.
recognising support and how it works, which is lovely
Mm.
to hear. If it when it does work, it works really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
It would be nice to have a little chat about what are the key benefits to a young person coming into the therapy sessions. What can we hope to get out of it at the other end? What do you
Mm.
think are the key benefits?
Okay. Well, it's like a lot of things in life. I think the earlier you get help for whatever it is that's going on in your life, then it does help prevent those mental health issues becoming more deeply entrenched and then harder to resolve in the end for whoever it is. And certainly for young people, then if they don't have that early intervention, it can lead to sort of things like self-harming, eating disorders, suicide thoughts, feelings, suicidal ideation, and indeed, sadly, the attempted suicides. So that's one of the key, really important things about accessing counselling earlier in life, and I think that's applicable to everyone, really. Whatever they are bringing or whatever they've held on to for a very long time can have a huge impact on their daily functioning as human beings within their community and the wider community, and contributing to society as a whole. So really important to get that help early.
Again, from a personal perspective, my child is now in his early 20s, and when
Mm,
we were finally able to access help, it's now given him the tools way into adult life. He's
Mm.
now in a position that I never could have believed that he would have been in. He's in higher education, he's able to manage his symptoms really, really well. But it was those key elements that he got in his kind of mid-teenage years he's still now applying now. And to a certain extent, he repeats it back to me. So when perhaps if we're struggling, something's going on at home, and he'll say, but have you thought, and it's just beautiful to hear when he's able to almost repeat it back to me. So I know now that he's got the tools in his toolkit that will take him into later life. So that is such an important part, isn't it? Getting that early. Even if it's not the right time, maybe step back and come back to it later, but starting that conversation and this isn't a magic wand that is going to think all of the bad stuff go away. It's about giving that child what they need to take them into adult life. And I think that is I can't think how important that is. So it's so wonderful that you're able to provide that.
And I think that's what we always strive to do. Even, if we just have one session with a client and they decide or feel it's just not the right time, they're not ready, they're not at that space where they can go to the places they might need to in therapy, we hope to give them a really positive experience so that at some point, whether it be months or years down the line, they can go, you know what, I had that session years ago. I wasn't ready, but it was really helpful and positive, and I'm ready now. And that might not be with Open Door, that may be with another service or whoever, but that's what we always strive to do.
Absolutely. And I've had clients who I saw when they were in their late teens, and 10, 12, 15 years later have come back to the service, which again is amazing. And to add to what Colette said, it's about what they experience in that first session. Do they feel valued? Do they feel accepted? Do they feel actually someone is really listening to them, and not just listening, but cares about what they're hearing and supports that and doesn't judge them in any way at all? Crucially important.
It's lovely, isn't it, that we can get our children to be in a position where they have faith. With our experience in our family, there was no learning going on because it was a constant battle every day at school. It was kind of flight or fight. So once we got him out of that fight and flight mode, the learning just came naturally.
Yes.
What do you think potentially are the barriers to families or young people actually accessing therapy that you provide? Is there anything that you think would stop families getting in touch?
I think it's a combination of factors. Families don't know where to start sometimes, don't even know where to begin the process of looking for help, or even what that help should look like. Again, we hear time and time again, unfortunately, families will go to their GP with their child or young person. They either don't come out of the surgery with any kind of solutions or help identified, or they are put on a NHS waiting list, which, I think you said at the beginning, Melissa, NHS are absolutely overwhelmed, and waiting lists are kind of spiraling out of control a little bit, I think. So families are faced with that, huge waiting times, no prospect of their child being seen at the point of crisis or at the point that they need the help. And I think there does still remain some element of stigma. I think that is reducing. I think mental health and conversations around it are a lot easier now than they were, and they're happening much more. But I think still, kind of going back to that concept of guilt and blame that sometimes parents might feel, I think there is still a stigma of asking for help. And then costs, if families choose to go down the private route, it's a bit of a minefield. Again, where do I begin? How do I find a trustworthy counsellor? How do I know they're qualified? How do I know they're registered with a professional body? And the costs, again, counsellors in private practice, the costs are
Phenomenal.
spiraling a little bit again. So I think there's a whole multitude of barriers, and when your members, when they finally find their way to us, they are so grateful and so thankful and so appreciative that, thank you for kind of being there and for responding quickly. And so yeah, that's what I'd say about that, really.
It sounds like there are still some challenges and barriers that would perhaps make a parent hesitant about reaching out. But if you could give them one piece of advice, as it were, what would that be?
Mm. Don't stop, don't be silenced, keep shouting, keep stomping your feet,
Yeah.
keep demanding help and support for your child or young person.
Yeah.
Don't let anyone fob you off. Ask as many questions as you need
Mm.
to.
Fight,
And
fight for them.
yeah, keep fighting and keep championing them. That's probably more than one piece of advice, but it kind of all goes together. So
And that
Yeah.
is
yeah,
great advice. And I would, as a mum who's been in that situation, um, I would say exactly the same. But keep going. You know the best, and you know
yeah,
that help is out there. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
just keep going. Just keep going.
Yeah, yeah.
I know this is probably something that we haven't spoken about for ages, but it does keep cropping up in conversation is what does the post-COVID landscape look like? We heard a lot coming out of lockdown that our children and young adults had suffered the most with having the social isolation. Their education
Mm.
was compromised because of the lockdowns. I mean, do you feel that there is still the lingering effects of that time?
Yeah, absolutely. I do, and it's it's easy for I think to think, oh, it's in the past, it's all gone, we're fine now, we're through that. But actually, we're not. And I think we've got several more waves of things to come because of COVID. And there hasn't been a great deal of research done on this, but I do know that the University of Oxford have done some, which I've come across quite recently, and very clear evidence that young people have definitely suffered as a result of the pandemic. It's worse than mental health, their emotional well-being. It's had a real impact on their ability to socially interact, with peers and other people. Many of them have become somewhat more withdrawn. So it's a huge impact that will continue, which is why we just shouldn't give up. We need to keep remembering there is a whole generation of well, everyone really, but if we're just looking at young people who've come through this and been quite seriously, in some cases, impacted by it. Their mental health has really kind of gone through the roof for some young people. Cases of depression in young people have certainly increased as well, and social anxiety. So, yeah, we need for every young person we see, we do need to remember that, and we do need to keep banging the drum about it. That it's not gone away; it's still there. It's still an issue.
Yeah, it has a very long tail. I think the
Yeah.
lockdown has,
Mm,
and I'm sure that
Mm.
you'll still be seeing cases that are impacted
mm,
by that. And I'm sure, people that were kind of just leaving school will now be taking it into adulthood as well, because
mm,
I think we can see COVID in a very positive light. The lockdown, the family unit was together, it was very good, but there are those that didn't and
mm.
that really struggled with it, and the impact it had on those children who were going through the key parts of their educational
Hugely.
process. That
Mhm.
is going to have a lingering effect. I imagine it probably has an impact on the way you delivered counselling as well. It must have changed during that COVID, that lockdown process. I mean, are there some processes now that you have in place that you've kept as a result of delivering your service?
Yeah, so who knew about kind of counselling sessions via Zoom and Teams and other platforms before COVID? It certainly wasn't something we as a service offered.
No.
So yeah, that I mean, obviously during the pandemic when we were in lockdown, that enabled that lifeline really to continue those counselling sessions with clients, that we weren't just abandoning them. So that was really helpful for them, and that is something that has continued post pandemic. So, and obviously for your members, sessions are on virtual because of your members. Locality and where they are. So that's continued. And I think what kind of always surprises me a little bit, but it probably shouldn't, is when I'm sat in a session on an online session with a young person, maybe a young person aged 10 or 11, and how they can, once that kind of relationship's there and the trust's developed, sit and talk to a face on a screen about
Mhm.
some really difficult
Mm.
stuff. And it's kind of very normalized for them. I guess, they did their online learning through the lockdowns. So for them, that's become a very normal way of communication. For me, it's still a little bit a little bit different, even though I've been doing it for quite a few years now. It still feels a little bit different, but it's clearly a beneficial model in it. And like I say, that means we can work with clients that are anywhere in the country, so it's really helpful.
I expect there has been a certain amount of adaptability for therapists and counsellors where I imagine that being face to face with someone, you're picking up a lot more on the physical
Yeah,
cues
Yeah.
that perhaps you don't
yeah.
pick up on over
Um,
Zoom or Teams. But
Mm,
also,
mm,
as I say, from a personal perspective, the child being in their own environment and talking to a therapist online gives them a little bit more security because they're in their home environment. And,
mhm,
their parents are just kind of on the other side of the door. It's not being
mm,
somewhere a bit alien. I know certainly my son really struggled with me taking him to the hospital or to a centre, whereas at home he found it much easier to be able to access
mm,
that
mm.
support online. So having that little bit of distance, but being in the home environment did help. So
I think logistically for parents, they don't have to plan the journey, they don't have to allow travel time, they don't have to pay parking costs, um, less interruption for families. So yeah, it clearly has lots of benefits. Yeah.
mhm. I think on balance as well, whether it's face to face or online, uh, a lot of it is dependent on the therapist themselves, how they work with that young person or adult. Are they still showing the same level of compassion and care and still working in a way that is of benefit to the young person? So whether it's online, face to face, I think the therapist has to take quite a lot of responsibility as well for ensuring all of those things are in place. And even though we can't quite as easily pick up those other cues, there's lots of other stuff we can pick up online as well.
I'm going to come back to quite a specific issue because we're kind of getting to the end of our conversation now, and we've covered so much ground, and it has been fantastic being able to explore all of these different topics. But there's something which is again very prevalent in the news and the media now around neurodiversity, and I imagine that quite a few of the cases that get referred to are based around that neurodiversion, that less neurotypical situation. And is there anything that you do specifically to adapt your counselling approaches for neurodiverse young people?
Yeah, so I think what's really important for us as a service is to not make assumptions. So not to assume that someone, because they're neurodivergent, needs this, or a previous client we saw who was neurodivergent, that worked for them. So we very much, like has been a bit of a common thread through this conversation, is about placing the client at the centre. They're the experts. You tell us what you need from us. You tell us if there's any adaptations we can make. We can't make promises. There might be some stuff that would just ethically or logistically be impossible for us to do, but you tell us what might help. So placing them right at the centre of it again. And I think the approach we use at Open Doors, so the person-centered model of therapy, it kind of really aligns well with that in terms of it's strengths based, draws on the client's expertise, draws on their experience and their lived experience, what life is really like for them. And the approach listens and values them. It really validates their feelings, rather than kind of trying to explain away their behaviors or explain away, maybe symptoms that they have. It really seeks to validate them as a whole person. Um, so sometimes there might be some practical adjustments we might make. So sessions might need to be a little bit shorter if a client is finding it difficult to sit and engage with the full 50 minutes. If we see clients face to face and that it's something they raise, then we might need to move chairs, or if there's a light that might be distracting, or something else sensory that might be they might be finding difficult, then we can make those adjustments. And also those things, those are the practical steps. So being really clear about what we're saying, checking out, understanding, has the client understood what we were saying, or do they have any questions? Um, and yeah, just giving them space as well. Sometimes people who are neurodivergent just need a little bit of extra processing time. So not kind of jumping question to question to question, giving them space to think about what they want to say, what they want to come back, and if there's anything else they want to look at with us. So I guess that kind of sums it up a little bit for us.
And I think just to add to that, really, it's not about fixing them, but sort of about validating their unique way of thinking, and really sort of trying to foster their self-acceptance and their resilience.
In wrapping up this session, is there anything that you would like to share with parents who are going to be listening to this? They might be in a really difficult place. They might not know where to turn next and are really struggling with the situation at home. Is there anything that you would like for them to take away?
Yeah, I think for me, sometimes that first step of asking for help is absolutely the most difficult part of this whole process. Kind of putting our hand up and saying, we're struggling, we need something else. We can't do this on our own anymore. We've tried and we're slowly sinking a little bit, so we need help. I think for me, that's what I would say to parents. Put your hand up, be brave, do what's right for you and your family, and say, I need help. That doesn't mean you're a bad parent. That doesn't mean you have to carry this guilt and this shame and embarrassment with you. But it's about saying, enough is enough now. We've tried everything. We need something else.
And I think just to add to that, for parents out there, we're all human beings. We've all had struggles and difficulties in our lives in different ways. They may be different, but we've all had them, or we've experienced them with our children growing up. And, being a client or the parent of a client isn't a unique situation, something we've all experienced in our lives in different ways at different times. So please reach out to us. We are there and we do care and we really want to help. But that first step, as Colette said, is an incredibly difficult one, and we do understand that.
It has been an absolute pleasure to speak to you both today. I know it's helped me from a personal perspective, and I know that there are individuals out there that are listening that will find this helpful in many ways, and also hopefully it might be that this might be the key to them reaching out to LionHeart and taking that first step. And please do, if you are struggling and not sure what the next step is, please get in touch with LionHeart and speak to one of our wonderful support team who will help you unpick what it is that's going on, and if it's appropriate, suggest a referral to Open Door, because that's what we're here for. We're here to support surveyors and their families through really difficult times in their lives, or when they might need a bit of support. Yes, Colette and Carmel, thank you for your time today. It has been a real pleasure talking to you, and as we say, please do reach out to the support team if you need that help from LionHeart. All of the numbers are on the website, and so please go in and check it out. But all that remains now is to say it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for your time, and see you again soon.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing, that how we have valued working with LionHeart, and how we found the team very caring, very compassionate, and it has been an absolute joy for us to work in partnership with you. So
Thank you very much. That is lovely to hear.
Yeah, thank you for having us and
enjoyed it.
giving us this platform to kind of shout a little bit about what what we do and what our passion is. So thank you.
Yes,
thank you
thanks.
both. That's all we have time for
Thank
today.
you.
And that, again, as I say, is the series of LionHeart Talks, and we hope to be back with you again soon.
Thanks so much for joining us on LionHeart Talks, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform to hear from us again, and don't forget you can find out more about how we're helping surveyors and their families on our website, lionheart.org.uk.